Hi friends, today we are going to discuss one of the important topics in international relations, that is realism. It's one of the main approaches in international relations. So to understand realism, we need to understand the word realism. It actually means to study politics, what is it, rather than studying what ought to be. Studying politics in what ought to be is called idealism. So realism is diametrically opposite to that of idealism. So the notion of realism can be traced to ancient figures like Thucydides, uh, Kautilya, and many other thinkers. So let's begin with Thucydides. In his book, The Peplosian War, the history of Peplosian War, he advocates a kind of a concept that the strong has the right to rule over the weak. The strong has the right to rule over the weak. So this reflects one of the core concepts of the realism. And in the works of Kautilya also, we can see the concept of realism. And one of the earliest contractualist thinkers, Thomas Hobbes, says that man is brutish in nature, is egoistic, brutish, and self-interested in nature. So these kinds of brutish, ego, self-interested nature is reflected in state also, because the state is made by men or humans itself. So this is what classical realist really points out, that state is something which is egoistic, and state reflects the nature of human beings, and state is interested to grab power because human beings are self-interested and they have an interest to grab power. Similarly, the state will also show the similar low nature of human, that is, no matter what, the state will try to grab power in any of the means. So this is the core philosophy of classical realists. Okay, now the modern, that is in the 20th century, the classical realism had emerged in response to the failure of classical liberalism, which couldn't avert the Second World War. So this is reflected in a book called 20-Year Crisis, written by E.H. Carr. He is one of the earliest proponents of the classical realism in the modern history. So he went on to criticize the liberalistic model. He said that morality can't ensure order in the world. It is the power which ensure order in the world. And he criticized the statesmen and intellectuals in UK and Britain for not showing much interest in power. But he is not a kind of a pure realist. He is not a kind of a pure realist. He also emphasizes on idealism, not purely on power. But when there is a conflict between power and idealism, state must go with power. So that is what E.H. Carr says. And a most comprehensive theories about classical realism was coined by his successor named Hans Morgenthau. Hans Morgenthau is considered to be father of classical realism. Hans Morgenthau, in his book Politics Among Nations, The Struggle for Power and Peace, he gives us 6 principles of political realism. The first is politics is governed by objective laws which reflects the nature, human nature, which reflects the human nature. That is first. Okay, politics is governed by objective laws which reflects human nature. Now, realism perceives world in terms of interest. Okay, and this interest is defined in terms of power. Okay, so realism what perceives the world through the concept of interest, and interest is defined in terms of power. Universally, interest is, and third one, universally interest is defined in terms of power. However, its meaning would change. That is, its meaning is dynamic. So universally interest is to be defined in terms of power. However, its meaning and interest may change. Now, realism is a perspective which is aware of, fourth one, realism is a perspective which is aware of moral importance of political actions. So they are not only worried about power. So realism is a perspective which is aware of moral importance of political actions. But in the fifth point, it says that moral aspiration is not universal. Every community, every state has its moral aspiration. That is what it is saying. And the last, as a tradition of thought, realism was distinct in its focus on autonomy of political realm and the decision made within it. So, as a tradition of thought, realism is finding it distinct characteristics from the field of political realm. Okay, and that decision which it makes. Okay, now getting to the neorealism or structural realism. So neorealism or structural realism was occurred in response to the fallacies which was created by the classical realists, because classical realism was not based on a scientific method, it was based on normative method. So in order to counter it, or in the wake of behavior revolution, neorealism had come into the picture, and the important scholar who advocated this neorealism was Kenneth Waltz. Okay, Kenneth Waltz. So he wrote a book called Theory of International Politics. Theory of International Politics for it. So what happens is that he studied realism on the basis of microeconomic structure. He analyzed that the international arena is like an anarchical structure. International arena is an anarchy. Why it is anarchy? Because there is no government. So in an anarchy, a lot of chaos can happen. So in order to protect from chaos, what happens is that the states would augment, would increase their security capabilities, would increase their military power over their rebels. Okay, so there would be what a competition is there, like microeconomics, like a marketplace. What happens is that in a marketplace, you can see that firms would compete each other to survive in the market. If not, if they can't outweigh their rivals, they would come down. Similarly, the state is like a firm in a marketplace, and marketplace is what? International arena. International arena is anarchical in nature. So if state does not augment or does not increase their military capability, it can be a threat to their security. So self-security or self-help is key feature to survive in the international arena according to neo-realistic perspective. Okay, now why the state resort to such kind of security or self-security? Because of the anarchy present in the international arena. Now, while we are seeing it, what happens is that why a conflict is closed in international arena, while we are examining classical realism and neo-realism, the reasons are different. According to classical realism, the egoistic and power-seeking nature of human beings is reflected in the states. That's why there is a conflict in the international arena according to classical realists. But according to neo-realists, the problem is with the anarchical structure of the international relations. Okay. Now, one of the fallacies which we need to highlight here is that neo-realism recognizes state as only the actors. It does not include other actors. Okay, like NGOs, multinational corporation. It is included in neoliberalist approach. Okay, neoliberalist approach. Now we can look at the differences, base differences between classical realism and neo-realism. As I told, the first difference I have told that the conflict in international relations, according to classical realism, is caused by the power-seeking nature of the state. Whereas in neo-realist, according to neo-realist perspective, the anarchy causes conflict in international relations. Now, second thing difference is that according to classical realist, power is an end to itself. So what happens? The state is what seeking for power. That is the ultimate aim of the state. But according to neo-realist, power is just a mean to state. So what is the aim or end of state according to neo-realist? It is the survival. The survival in the international arena is the ultimate aim or end of state according to neo-realist in the international arena. Now, let's get into two different types of neo-realism: defensive realism as well as offensive realism. The proponents of defensive realism are Kenneth Wells, Jack Snyder, and Stephen Van Evera. If you want to remember, just remember about Kenneth Wells, okay, which we have discussed. Okay, Kenneth Wells. Now, what do you mean by defensive realism? In defensive realism, according to defensive realism, the state must maintain military power in order to defend against its rival, not to establish hegemony in international arena. So this is what defensive realism is seeking for. So what defensive realism tells? Defensive realism advocates states to increase its military capability in order to defend itself from rivals. So defense can be achieved by using what? Increasing military power or forming some counter alliance against the enemies, etc. Okay, and they are against establishing hegemony over other states in international arena. So some of the reasons are, first reason is that if a state establishes an hegemony in the international arena, it will distort balance of power. Balance of power is a concept where power is shared equally among states in the international arena, so that any one state would not exert its influence over other states. So this is called balance. So if an hegemony is born, what happens is that it will distort the balance of power in the international states. So what happens is that the other states will join and create a warlike situation to counter what? This hegemon. Okay. Now, if I am using an offensive realism. Offensive realism means to create a hegemony. What happens is that a state will conquer other states, but it is not feasible. It will create a lot of costs. Okay, and due to nationalism, the conquered the state, the hegemon state, could not subdue the nationals under the conquered land for a long time. To conquer them, it needs a lot of resources. So these are two reasons why defensive realists do not favor a hegemonic offensive realism. But offensive realism has their own version. One of the main proponents of offensive realism is John Mashima. John Mashima. He had wrote the book The Tragedy of Great Power Politics. the tragedy of great power politics. Now, what happens is that, according to him, states constantly seek opportunities to maximize their power and hegemony in their to maximize their power, and hegemony is their ultimate goal. Like US, so US seeks to what, establish its hegemony and to increase power to establish its hegemony. Balance is a kind of balance of power is an inefficient tool. Why? Because it allows the rebels to augment, to take advantage of their adversaries. That is what offensive realism is saying. So these are all about the classical and neo-realism. I hope you had understood this session. Hope you a nice day.